Welcome to On the Moneyline, a podcast by MMA Play 365. I'm Newsome, and I'm here to break down UFC 313, which goes down this weekend. It's a pay-per-view, it's a big card. We've got the UFC Light Heavyweight Championship on the line. We've also got, finally, Magomed Ankalaev fighting for the title once again after that strange fight with Jan Blachowicz for the vacant title that he did have a couple of years ago. But Ankalaev finally gets another shot to wear that UFC gold. It's a phenomenal fight. I can't wait to break it down. And for me, there's a little bit additional excitement in there because Magomed Ankalaev was one of three fighters a number of years ago that I said would be a future UFC champion. And like I said, he gets that opportunity once again to prove myself right. So yeah, definitely looking forward to that. But before we get into all the breakdowns, as always, if you want to jump into the action this weekend, then make sure you do so at MMAplay365.com. We've got something for every type of gambler, whether you're a long-term gambler that loves the written breakdowns to figure out why we're recommending certain bets, whether you're a fun gambler that likes the long shot parlays, or whether you're somebody that just likes to tail a handicapper, which is myself. We've got all of those three sections available for you. And of course, in every betting subscription on our platform, you will get Blaydes AI included, which is our UFC prediction software, which gives you a percentage prediction for every possible outcome of every fight in the UFC every single week. All our subscriptions are super affordable as well. Nothing is too expensive, and that's all at MMAplay365.com. And with the introduction out the way, with the promo out of the way, let's get breaking down some fights. And of course, as always, we start in the main event. We've got the UFC Light Heavyweight Championship on the line. We've got Alex Pereira versus Magomed Ankalaev. Now, I did mention briefly in the introduction that Ankalaev was one of three fighters that I did predict would be future UFC champions a number of years ago. And ironically, all three of those fighters were Russian fighters. The first one was Islam Makhachev. That was the first one that I predicted, which got laughed at. That was before Makhachev was even in the top 15 as well, before he was a ranked fighter. And, you know, that got laughed at, and look at how that turned out. The other one was Khamzat Chimaev. Now, Chimaev and Ankalaev, I think I predicted roughly around the same time. And yeah, look, Chimaev hasn't got there yet, but he should have the title shot next in that division against Dricus du Plessis, or at least you would assume so anyway. So he will have his opportunity, I would imagine, this year. And then right now we've got Ankalaev, who did already have one opportunity to do this, but that fight with Jan Blachowicz, I'm not really going to reference that too much. It was a strange fight. It was definitely, in my opinion, an off night for Magomed Ankalaev. Like, if they've run that fight back right now, Ankalaev wins that fight and everybody knows it. You know, it was one of those where it was just an off night from a professional sports person, which happens in every sport. And again, like I say, if they run it back, Ankalaev gets that job done. But also, it was really like short notice, came out of nowhere. I can't remember whether it was Yuri Prohatska or whether it was Jamal Hill that got injured, just vacated the belt like a few weeks before they were supposed to fight, and then the UFC just matched that fight. So I'm pretty confident Ankalaev and Blachowicz, both of them never really had a full camp, or at least like 8 weeks knowing that they're going to be fighting for a title, and then the 5 rounds on top of that. I just don't think it's worth referencing too much, that fight. It's one of those fights where I think you can just chalk off. But I will say one thing, when I did predict that Magomed Ankalaev was going to be a future UFC champion, there was absolutely no Alex Pereira in the mix. You know, Alex Pereira, I'm not sure was even in the UFC when I predicted Ankalaev was going to be a champion. Never mind, like, starting in the middleweight division and then moving up. Now, it's not going to change the way that I think. You know, I still believe Ankalaev is going to be a UFC champion. It's just Alex Pereira does pose a much bigger threat and a much bigger challenge than the guys in and around the top of the division at the time that I predicted Ankalaev to be a champion. And it was around the time where Rakic was also one of those fighters where a lot of people thought would make it to be a UFC champion as well. So we are going back a number of years ago, but coming back to this fight, I think it's a really intriguing fight. Like I say, look, Magomed Ankalaev has got to mind his P's and Q's in this fight, because Alex Pereira, for those that maybe didn't believe that he was going to make those correct improvements and developments, which, to be honest with you, I was on the fence with at one point. I am sold on Alex Pereira really solidifying where he is right now. Like, he is working on his wrestling. You can see that, even if it's just from a defensive perspective, to keep fighters standing, which I think would have been Glover Teixeira's primary concern with Alex Pereira, just making sure he can keep fighters standing. But then his striking is like, even though it's not like he hasn't got like erratic movement, crazy in and out movement, massive speed and a ton of energy inside the cage. Like, everything he throws is with power, and it's effortless power as well. So he's not like overexerting himself, emptying the gas tank by loading up on power. He's just got that natural power with everything that he throws, whether it be, either leg, knees, elbows, either hand. He's just got power everywhere. So it's something that Ankalaev definitely has to be careful of here, because if he doesn't, then he's going to find himself looking up at the lights with the referee, pulling him up from the floor, with Alex Pereira retaining his title. So he's got to respect the power and the striking coming from Pereira. Now, the thing is with Ankalaev, and I think absolutely everybody is going to be mentioning this point, and that's the wrestling of Ankalaev, because Ankalaev legitimately has solid wrestling and probably some of the best wrestling you're going to see in the entire division, but he just doesn't use it as much as he should and as much as we want to see him use it. Like, he has an advantage over almost everybody with the wrestling and the topside grappling. Like, I know I said I wasn't going to reference this, but look at when he did change things up with Jan Blachowicz and decided that he was going to wrestle. Well, that's what saved him from losing that fight. Like, he's got legitimate wrestling, good takedowns against the cage, pulling fighters on top, and then he's got the natural Russian wrestling and topside grappling game that, like I say, we want to see him use it more to activate his biggest path to victory in pretty much every fight that he fights. But the dude loves to strike, and he's a good striker as well, so you can't really hate the fact that he doesn't go to where, most of us believe that he's strongest, because he's very good striking also, and he must just prefer to strike. So it's going to be one of them in regards to, what do I think is going to happen versus the analysis that I've taken from his previous fights. Because look, when you research these fights and the fighters, and you watch, recent previous tape, you build your analysis from that. Now, your analysis would tell you that you would stand and strike with Alex Pereira, but I think that everybody's going to be saying that, okay, Ankalaev doesn't shoot takedowns, so he's going to stand with Pereira and get knocked out. But I think that he is going to shoot in this fight. I would be very surprised if he doesn't. Now, I don't think it's going to be like a relentless shooting 4 or 5 takedowns per round, but I think that Ankalaev is going to get takedowns here, and at the very least, even if, I think he's going to get Pereira down, but even if Pereira can get back up to his feet, even if he does have somewhat of an improved get-up game here, enough to get back up to his feet, I think the takedowns being a threat is going to be enough for Pereira not to be hesitant. I don't think he'll be hesitant. I think he'll trust himself with the defensive wrestling and grappling, even though I think he's outmatched there. But I think it'll be enough to just break the flow up a little bit of Alex Pereira's striking, just make him think a little bit more. Because look, the fighters that Pereira's been fighting recently, he hasn't really had to worry about a takedown threat. He can go out there, he can be fluid, he can flow with his striking, get his reads, be confident in pushing forwards, knowing that, he can eat what they can give him, but they can't eat what he can give. Whereas, again, with Ankalaev, if he's shooting takedowns, I think it just puts that tiny bit of a pause in Pereira, just to break the fluidity and the flow of the striking. And then Ankalaev can openly strike himself. I think, look, there's one or two ways this fight's going to go. I think it's either going to be a very low volume striking fight, because both fighters are going to respect each other's power. And, with Pereira, maybe not have as much respect for Ankalaev striking, but the low volume from Pereira's side will be coming from the fact that, there might be a takedown coming at any point. So I think it's going to be either a low volume striking affair, or I think that Ankalaev is going to come in with a wrestling heavy game plan. Again, not overly relentless where he tires himself out, but just be able to get takedowns sort of halfway through the round and then remain on top for the remainder of the round and steal the rounds that way. So I think obviously if it's Magomed Ankalaev shooting the takedowns, I think he gets the takedowns and the top control time, and I think he wins the fight. If it's the low volume striking affair, I still think Ankalaev can win that type of fight, because I think from a volume perspective, he might be able to get up there and edge the volume in the fights. It's just the only worry for Ankalaev in that type of fight is he can get caught by Pereira. But this is the other thing, like, I don't think Ankalaev's the type of fighter that is going to crumble once Pereira hits him. Like, I don't think he's a type of fighter that's, he's tough, he's durable. We've seen him take big shots. Like, we've not seen him take a shot from Pereira, but, we know that he's not going to get hit and just go down. Like, he might get knocked out. That's always a possibility. But, he's tough, he's durable, he's not going to quit on himself. The only worry that you do have for Ankalaev is maybe he gets that, he needs to make sure that he's very aware of the low kicks coming from Pereira, because the super hard low kicks, we saw Jan Blachowicz, again, I know I said I wasn't going to reference it, but we saw Jan Blachowicz beat up that lead leg of Ankalaev as well in that fight. Again, it's just a case of Ankalaev for me just minding P's and Q's, because I do believe he's a better mixed martial artist. I do believe going punch for punch, low volume striking affair, he can compete with Pereira and still beat him in that type of fight. And I just don't see this fight being like 100 strikes on 100 plus strikes on either side, or it is 5 rounds, so maybe 100 is possible. But look, I don't think we're going to see like 150 strikes each in this fight over a 5-round striking fight. I really don't think we're going to see that. I think it's going to be low volume. That's going to give Ankalaev time to be technical, come in and out of range, and land the strikes that he needs to land. Again, just mind your P's and Q's. But then if it's the wrestling, you start mixing in the wrestling in, and I think Ankalaev has got a good path to victory here to win. So again, he's got to be careful. I do respect Alex Pereira. He's probably the biggest star in the sport right now. Super entertaining, great personality. But I do think that, it's Ankalaev's time. It was always a matter of time before he was going to win a belt. I thought it was going to be the Jan Blachowicz fight, but it wasn't. It wasn't also the right circumstances either. This fight, full training camp, clear path to victory. I think he can also compete where Alex Pereira is good as well. I think it's the time of Ankalaev. So for those reasons, I'm picking Magomed Ankalaev to win this fight and become the new UFC light heavyweight champion. And in the next fight, we have a rematch. It's a good rematch, but I do have one complaint. I'll get to that in just a second. We've got Justin Gaethje versus Rafael Fiziev 2. The complaint is that it's not 5 rounds. That's simple as that. It's 3 rounds. Really wanted 5, but to be fair, I kind of get it. I'm sure Gaethje was planning for a 3-round fight initially anyway before Dan Hooker pulled out. I could be wrong about that, but the flip side is Dan Hooker pulled out and Rafael Fiziev stepped in on short notice, so probably a little bit unfair. Even if that Gaethje and Hooker fight was 5 rounds, I do get that Fiziev probably didn't want to come into this fight on super short notice against the super dangerous Justin Gaethje and do 5 rounds. He might have thought, look, I'm good for 3. You start putting me in 4 and 5 in a fast-paced war, then yeah, I'm putting myself at risk. So I understand that. But man, that is exactly what I think we're going to get. Like, the UFC have done a really good job here, because with Gaethje and Hooker, we were going to get a war. And with Hooker out, we're thinking, well, damn, who's going to step up on short notice against Justin Gaethje? Like, the dude's an absolute savage. It's not an easy fight for anybody, especially not short notice. Well, in comes Rafael Fiziev. And hopefully we get exactly what we got last time. It was 2 years ago. Fiziev and Gaethje fought. Gaethje won via a majority decision. Like I say, it was an absolute war. It was a super close fight as well. You could have had an argument for the fight going either way, so there's no robbery or anything like that, but it was Justin Gaethje that took that majority decision. But yeah, man, it was a war. Both fighters back and forth, bloodied up, damage, again, just super entertaining. So I think we're going to get the exact same thing here, though, the exact same type of fight, shall I say, that we had last time. Gaethje, great wrestling, never really uses it offensively. Fiziev, again, he can wrestle as well, but both fighters just love to strike. That's where they're predominantly best. That's where they prefer to to keep the fight standing so they can really flourish with the strikes, and that's just where they enjoy doing the work and doing the business. So it's a perfect stylistic matchup for, for a clash of styles and to make it super entertaining. Now, I kind of feel like the fight's gonna go a similar way, but I do think that we're going to get a slightly different result here. I like Fiziev in this fight. I think that, look, Justin Gaethje is, like I said, he's an absolute savage. Definitely not a fighter that many people will want to fight in general, never mind on short notice. But the thing is with Gaethje, he's coming off that, that insane KO loss against Max Holloway, which at the time, in that moment where all of our jaws were dropped to the floor, we knew that we were seeing something absolutely remarkable and unbelievable. I don't think we realised that we were actually witnessing history at that time in regards to, probably the most insane exchange that, most insane exchange that we've ever seen, but probably the most insane exchange that we will ever see. Like, it was just incredible. If you don't know what I'm talking about, then man, just switch this podcast off right now, come back to it later, go and watch Gaethje versus Holloway in his last fight. But I'm pretty sure 100% of people that are listening to this right now know exactly what I'm talking about. But coming back to Justin Gaethje, look, he ate around 180 plus significant strikes in that fight against Holloway before that knockout. His damage, and the thing is with Gaethje, he has taken a lot of damage. He's been in so many wars over the years. A number of different fighters have landed over 100 plus strikes on him in fights, and like I say, that's going to catch up to you at some point. Now, we actually thought Gaethje, a lot of people actually thought Gaethje might have been done a number of years ago, but he sort of cleaned up his style. He used to be so reckless where he didn't care. He would eat 5 shots if it meant just landing one big bomb himself, and I think he realised that there was no longevity in that type of fight, and he really switched things up to the point where he was fighting a little bit smarter, and because of that, he's managed to extend his career quite a lot further than a lot of people thought he was. But like I say, at 36 years old now, it's potentially it's around that age where it's going to be catching up with him, especially with the miles on the clock. And I think Fiziev's the guy to potentially expose that and really, make us see that everything's catching up with Gaethje right now. Like I say, from a stylistic perspective, you could analyse this fight for days. They're both good punchers, they're both good kickers, body kicks, leg kicks, put combinations together, they've both got power. But when you're looking at, in that type of fighter, who's more durable, who's going to be the one that actually gets at the opponent, I think it's going to be Fiziev here. I trust Fiziev's durability more. He's got the youth and the lesser miles on the clock in his favour in this fight, and I think when they're both cracking, I just think Fiziev's going to be hurting Gaethje a little bit more than Gaethje's going to be hurting Fiziev, and eventually we could see Gaethje crack again in this fight where, maybe his hurt dropped and, Fiziev's really piling on the damage and again, just giving it to Gaethje inside the cage with, from an elite striking perspective with that power added in and just mixing things up. And look, I think it's going to be competitive. Maybe I've made this sound like Fiziev's going to run through Gaethje, and I don't believe that. I do believe that we're going to see another war. I do think it's going to be back and forth. But like I say, when it's back and forth and they're exchanging, I just think Fiziev's going to be hurting Gaethje a little bit more than the other way around, and that's going to allow him to get the win. Maybe it's a late stoppage. Maybe it's a decision that's quite clear with a lot of damage being on the side of Gaethje. So yeah, look, I think it's a fight where Fiziev has probably just got the edge here. So for those reasons, I'm picking Rafael Fiziev to win this fight. And in the next fight, this is a super intriguing fight and one that it speaks volumes that it's the fight before the co-main event on a huge pay-per-view card. We've got Jalin Turner versus Ignacio Bahamondes. Now, the first thing that's really interesting about this is, look, both guys are absolutely huge for the division. Both 6'3". Jalin Turner's got a slight 2-inch reach advantage at 77-inch opposed to Bahamondes' 75. But when both of these fighters fight in this division, they're normally the fighter that has got the huge, length, reach, range advantage over their opponent. So it always intrigues me when this happens, and it does happen more often than you think when, you know, a huge fighter in a division fights for years against fighters that are so much smaller than them. They get used to being that taller, longer, rangier guy. But then there's another fighter that comes into the division that's got that same height, range and reach, and they eventually get matched up against each other. And we've got that here because Ignacio Bahamondes and Jalin Turner won't have the advantages that they normally have in the fights because they're both as big as each other. So I think we're going to get a really big, you know, pun intended with that, big clean fight here in regards to two tall, long, rangy guys. And it's which fighter's going to do the better work at now they've got the same range as their opponent. Now it's from how they're matched up, it's an interesting one because Jalin Turner, he's coming off that fight with Renato Moicano, which, if you watch that back, that was the fight where Jalin Turner had the fight won, and he just didn't win it, and then it went into round 2, and he got finished and lost. So it was sort of, you know, he fumbled it a little bit in that first round. You know, he'll look back at that. He'll hate to look back at that because he knew that he'll know that fight was won. But, you know, he didn't. So he's coming off that loss against Renato Moicano. But if you look at Jalin Turner, he's had a rise in the UFC where, you know, he was beating fighters that, look, at the time, people thought he wasn't going to beat. Like, he was an underdog in a few of those fights. But, you know, he showed that he's at a level where he's going to beat a certain level of fighters in the UFC. But it feels like every single time he's had that big step up in competition in regards to just fighting that next level up of quality of opponent, he falls short. Whereas Bahamondes, we don't really know that yet. This is Bahamondes's fighting a next level competition type of fighter that's been in and around some of the top fights in the division as well. So where Jalin Turner was fighting a Renato Moicano or a Matthews Gamrot, this is Bahamondes' version of that. So we're gonna see and we're gonna find out a lot of what Bahamondes is made of it, because if Bahamondes goes in here and beats Jalin Turner, then that's setting him up for the next level of competition perfectly. And that's what he needs in his development in the UFC. But for Jalin Turner on the flip side, now he's, in his mind, he'll be fighting back down from that top level competition against, you know, the types of fighters, the types of level of fighters in the UFC that he normally would beat. So it's a super intriguing fight from that perspective. Now, when it comes to where and how this fight plays out, I do think it's going to be predominantly a striking fight. Both fighters will fight tall, long, rangy. I like that they've got the big cage as well, so they'll both be able to move a little bit. They've both got really good movement, good speed, so I think the big cage will definitely help this fight flow. And when it comes to the wrestling and grappling, I think, look, I don't think we're going to see much of it, or if any at all. But if we do see something, I would assume it would more likely come from Jalin Turner's side, but I just don't think that, although Turner's a good topside grappler, I think Bahamondes will be able to get back up to his feet. You know, he does a lot of work with Belal Muhammad, so that side of his game is going to be improving in regards to not just the defensive wrestling, but the grappling as well, for sure. Still a very young and developing and improving fighter, so I think that Turner probably does have the advantage, if any, with the wrestling and grappling, but I just don't think it's enough for this fight to be won and lost in those areas. I think it's going to be won and lost in the striking. I think it's going to be a super close fight. I think it's going to be back and forth. It's definitely a fight where you can understand that it's pretty much a dead even pick 'em across the board. If there does end up being a plus money underdog in this fight, then that's the side to bet, in my opinion. But from how the fight plays out, like I say, it's going to be one of those fights, I think, where either all 3 rounds are super close and we've got, you know, no real strong lean of which way the judges are going to go, or we're going to see one of those fights where one fighter absolutely has one round, the other fighter absolutely has another round, and then there's one razor close round that could go either way. I think it's going to be one of those types of fights. If there's a knockout, man, I don't know which fighter gets that knockout. I don't know where that upside is on this. I just think it's one of these really interesting, really intriguing fights where, like I say, I haven't got like a super solid read on, or a super solid opinion on who's going to win the fight from a betting perspective, like I say, if one of these gets into plus money, then that's the side to bet. But from a straight pick and prediction perspective, I am slightly leaning with Ignacio Bahamondes, with the youthfulness, the rapid improvements and developing, and he's on his way up, whereas Jalin Turner might have had his chance and opportunities at the top of the division and it's not quite worked for him, so he's on his way down a little bit, although, like I say, he's not declining or anything. I just feel like he's risen, he's had his opportunity. It's probably not worked out for him that at least for right now, that he's gonna be there in and around the top of the division. Whereas Bahamondes, he still doesn't know that, he's still on his rise. So, you know, the kind of momentum is on his side here as well. This is where I'm getting the slight extra reads on Bahamondes, which is the reason that from a straight pick and prediction perspective, I'm picking Ignacio Bahamondes to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Amanda Lemos versus Iasmin Lucindo. Now, it's interesting with the betting line here because Lucindo was actually a plus money underdog, and then the money's coming on her to the point where the line's flipped, and now we get the plus money on Amanda Lemos. Now, I kind of liked Lucindo as the plus money underdog just because, again, similar to what I've just said with the last fight, I think it's a really close fight. I'm kind of unsure exactly how it plays out. But again, the plus money from Lucindo's perspective with the younger fighter, the fighter that's, you know, developing and rising more rapidly, I kind of like the plus money on Lucindo. But with the line flipped, I feel the value's flipped as well. And I do think the value's on the side of Amanda Lemos because, look, Lemos is going to be very different to Lucindo's last opponent. So look, with Lucindo and Marina Rodriguez, like Lucindo was very fortunate that she was fighting a fighter that could be taken down, that doesn't really have too much of a get-up game, and that was a super clear path to victory. But that's completely different with Amanda Lemos. Like, Lemos does have wrestling and grappling in her back pocket should she need it. Lemos is also a dangerous striker as well, and a different striker to Marina Rodriguez. She also knocked Marina Rodriguez out as well. So whereas Iasmin Lucindo needed the takedowns and the topside grappling to beat Marina Rodriguez, Amanda Lemos fought Rodriguez where Rodriguez was best and beat her. But the thing is, I do think Lucindo is going to have some takedown and grappling advantages in this fight. It's just not going to be as extensive as what it was in a previous fight. But I do think if Lucindo can get Amanda Lemos down, I think Lucindo can do good work on top of her, maybe run half of the round away with her on top, potentially win the rounds that way as well. So I do think there's a path to victory there. It's just not as significant as what it was in the last fight. But the issue is, I think Lemos is going to cause a lot of problems to Lucindo with the pressure, the forward pressure and the power that she brings to the cage. So like Rodriguez, is like, you know, the Muay Thai type of fighter where she's very slow and patient, and, you know, she's fine counter striking as well. But Lemos will actually come forward. She will try and be a bully in there. So it just makes me wonder, if Lucindo's on the back foot, how many opportunities is she going to get to be able to take Lemos down? But I do think like, if Lemos is being overly aggressive, maybe it's a tie-up for Lucindo, and Lucindo does, to be fair to her, do a better work with the takedowns from trips inside the clinch opposed to like single legs and double legs. You know, she does do a good job of getting underhooks, double underhooks, and then reaping the legs and taking her opponent down that way. So I just think it's a super close fight between two women that match up really well. And again, very similar to what I said with Turner and Bahamondes a minute ago, I don't really have a strong opinion on who's going to win this fight. Like, I'm not going to sit here, plant my flag and be like, okay, well, Lucindo's absolutely going to win this fight, or Lemos is absolutely going to win this fight. I think it's going to be very close. I think they're very well matched. I think it's going to be super competitive. But again, when I'm looking at a straight pick and prediction, I do like the youthfulness again of Lucindo, the fighter that's rising up against the fighter that's probably had the moment at the top of the division and they're on the way back down. Again, I don't think there's a decline on Lemos, but what I'm saying is she's been up there, she's tried, she's not quite got there yet, and now she's fighting down a little bit, whereas Lucindo's on her way up, fighting up. And yeah, look, it's a tough fight to be confident in, but like I say, I'm getting the slight leans and the slight edges on Lucindo. Look, from a betting perspective, I think the value's with Amanda Lemos, but from a pick and prediction perspective, I am picking Iasmin Lucindo to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got King Green versus Mauricio Ruffy. Now, with Mauricio Ruffy, I think the big talking point here is that James Yontop fight that he had last time out. It was like a -1,000 or maybe even wider favourite. You know, everybody expected him to come in and just absolutely destroy James Yontop. And he had some moments in that first round, but man, like, Ruffy looked like he ran out of ideas a little bit, maybe ran out of steam a little bit, and James Yontop actually outstruck him as well. And, you know, like, Ruffy won the fight, won it unanimously over 3 rounds, just with the additional bit of aggression, maybe forward pressure, looking like he's landing the harder shots, but it was definitely not the fight that anyone thought it was going to be. Everyone thought it was just going to be Ruffy coming in there and just absolutely running through him, especially, you know, when you look at what happened with the fight and how it played out with the Malarkey fight on Ruffy's UFC debut. And again, I know that was a short notice fight, but like coming from that Malarkey fight where Jamie Malarkey is a legitimate UFC vet, very good as well, very skilled, well-rounded, to James Yontop, who I don't believe is anywhere close to the level of Malarkey. It was just, I don't know, I'm kind of wanting to chalk it off as, you know, again, like I said with Ankalaev and Blachowicz earlier on, you know, professional sports people at this level of the sport, whether that's, you know, MMA in the UFC or football in the Premier League, you know, all sports, men and women, have off days, off games, off matches, whatever, you know, the correct terminology is for the sport that you're referencing. And I just feel that may be able to describe Ruffy and Yontop, because, like I say, Ruffy should have gone in there and absolutely destroyed him, and he didn't. But I kind of feel like that's the consensus, that Ruffy just had an off night, because you're looking at the odds now against King Green, or Bobby Green as some may remember him. You know, Green's been around some of the best fighters in the world in the UFC for years and years. So the fact that Ruffy is, you know, again, a -500, -600 favourite here, again, does indicate that a lot of people are just putting that last fight of Ruffy down to potentially an off night, and, you know, Ruffy will do what he's supposed to do here and against King Green. And I'm on board with that as well. Like, I'm not saying that Ruffy should be a -500, -600 favourite, and there's certainly no value in that. You know, look for, you know, method of victory or props or anything like that. But I just think that Ruffy, again, from a straight pick and prediction perspective, is going to win this fight. I think that King Green is coming towards the end of his career, and I still don't think he's like on a massive decline or anything, but when you're looking at how this fight's going to play out, I think from a striking perspective, Ruffy's going to bring good forward pressure. I think Green, he fights a lot with his hands down and he plays a little bit, but the way that you really stop Green from, you know, capitalizing on that and you know, punish him for playing around and having his hands low, is with super high pressure, forward pressure, big power and volume. And I think that's what Ruffy's going to bring to the cage. So I just don't think where Green's comfortable in fights is when he can sort of set the pace and the pressure, and he, you know, the pace can be a little bit slower, and he can slip the punches and lean back when his opponents are striking, and just play around and talk to his opponent, and again, just be relaxed and composed in there. But with how Mauricio Ruffy fights, with the forward pressure, stepping on the gas and coming forwards, I think Green's going to be very uncomfortable from a striking perspective. Then when it comes to the wrestling and grappling, I just think Ruffy's going to be too aggressive and too powerful for Green to, you know, even have a game plan of trying to take him down relentlessly, consistently, and then having top control time over him. I just don't think that's the path to victory for Green here. For Green to win this fight, I think his path to victory is weather a storm and hope that Ruffy gets tired, and then Green can come on in the later rounds like the UFC vet that he is. But I just think Ruffy's just going to be a problem stylistically with how Ruffy fights. I just think he's going to make Green super uncomfortable and be a bit of a problem for him. So for those reasons, I am picking Mauricio Ruffy to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got a fun fight here at heavyweight for sure. We've got Curtis Blaydes versus Rizvan Kuniev making his UFC debut. Now, this Rizvan Kuniev, it's quite funny actually. You look from a physique perspective, I don't really want to slam the guy, but Like, he fights in the Contender Series as the first time that most people will have heard of them, and this was going back a couple of years now. So he fights on the Contender Series, and the dude's one of these bigger heavyweights, if you like, from a bit soft around the way, shall we say. He's a very, you wouldn't say in shape heavyweight is the nicest way that I think that I can put it, but I think you're getting what I'm getting at here. So look, he's got a boatload of talent, like good striker, good power, got some wrestling as well, but physically doesn't really look the part. He gets the win on the Contender Series, but he doesn't get the contract. Then he goes on PFL, and the dude looks like shredded compared to what he's looked like previously. I still wouldn't say, like, obviously he's still not Francis Ngannou type of shredded, but he looks in much better shape. And he goes out there against Renan Ferreira, who, by the way, is a top PFL heavyweight, and he absolutely batters him. Like, I wouldn't say like 10-8s him in any of the rounds, but he comfortably beats Renan Ferreira, and he was a big underdog. Kuniev was a big underdog in that fight as well. So then you're thinking, well, dude, this guy looks phenomenal. Like, he's cleaned himself up, he's in shape, like, he looks the part. But then he pops for steroids. And now you're asking yourself the question, well, okay, is that the reason for the physique change? So it's just an interesting talking point. Then he comes back to the Contender Series after this PFL fight, and the dude looks like, from a physique perspective, he looks exactly like how he looked before the PFL and before the steroids. So then you're thinking, okay, well, yeah, it must be the steroids. But then, like I say, he gets the win, and the UFC have called him, and you're thinking, well, realistically, he's fighting Curtis Blaydes on his UFC debut, a solidified UFC top 15 fighter, and has been for years. What's he going to look like now he's not, sort of on the steroids and, the physique? Because the best performance we've seen from him was that Renan Ferreira performance. And if that version of Kuniev steps in here against Blaydes, I think he beats him. So you're a little bit unsure. But then I go on Instagram, and man, this guy, again, I'm not saying anything here, but this guy is looking in absolute, I haven't seen the top off picture, but at least in the rash guards, the guy doesn't look like he's got the physique that he had in the Contender Series. It looks closer to the physique that he had in the PFL. So again, like, it's going to be a really interesting one to see which Kuniev we get. And again, I know I've just said I haven't seen the top off pick, but man, like, for those that don't know, rash guards will absolutely expose anything that you've got that, in regards to being a bit on the bigger side, if you know what I mean. So yeah, look, Kuniev is looking in, it's going to be interesting to see what he steps on the scales like. I'll say that for sure, because if this is a Kuniev in shape, and the Kuniev that's in the same physical shape as what he was in PFL, then I actually think this version of Kuniev beats Blaydes, because that Kuniev was a little bit more explosive, a little bit more athletic, and I think those are the two things that he's going to need to beat a Curtis Blaydes here. From a striking perspective, look, I've always liked Curtis Blaydes as an MMA fighter. Anybody that's sort of been listening to my breakdowns and following me for a while, you know that Curtis Blaydes has been one of my favourite fighters for a very long time. Solid wrestling, good MMA wrestling, heavy topside grappling, and then a fighter that's improved in the striking element, considering that, his background is within wrestling. So yeah, look, in regards to Blaydes, he can do it all, but I do think Kuniev is the better striker, and more importantly, the more dangerous striker in this fight between the two. It just comes down to, look, I do think Curtis Blaydes is going to shoot takedowns because that's his game. And it just comes down to, does Kuniev get taken down or not? Well, I think if he's in good shape and physically strong, I think he's probably going to get taken down against Blaydes, but I think that he can defend some takedowns and he will be able to get back up to his feet as well. I just don't think Blaydes has got the same drive and the same conviction as what he had. Like, look at that Volkov fight, that 5-round Volkov fight that he had a number of years ago. Like, the amount of takedowns, I don't remember the exact number, but I'm sure we're talking like maybe 30, 40 takedown attempts. Like, the dude was so gassed out in round 5 just because of how relentless he was at this weight at 265 pounds. But I don't think the Curtis Blaydes that we had in that Volkov fight, for example, is the same Curtis Blaydes that we see now. I think Blaydes is a little bit more passive. He's a little bit happier to stand and strike, whereas before he was like, I'm going to take you down. You know I'm going to take you down. Try and stop it. That was the attitude he had. Whereas now I just don't think he's as willing to shoot as many takedowns. I think that, fighters are doing a better job of being able to stand back up to the feet. And I think Kuniev might crack Blaydes with something coming in here. And I am basing this off Kuniev being looking physically brilliant, and not the Kuniev we've seen in both the Contender Series fights. Because I think that version of Kuniev, like I say, I just don't think the speed and athleticism is going to be enough to prevent Blaydes doing what he's doing. But if this is an in-shape Kuniev, which I'm basing this pick and prediction off, I think that version of Kuniev does a better job, lands hard shots, pushes forwards, could maybe brick wall Blaydes on a couple of takedown attempts as well. And again, Blaydes, for all of his great aspects, he has been knocked out quite a number of times now, and I just don't know if he's going to be able to survive the power of Kuniev. Kuniev, look, this is a fist fight, and regardless of how the fight plays out, Kuniev's going to punch Curtis Blaydes in the face numerous times very hard. I just don't know if Blaydes can withstand it. So again, basing it on a certain, definitely a certain level of, strength and physique from Kuniev's side, and I'm definitely interested to see the weigh-ins. But for the pick and prediction, I am picking the underdog Rizvan Kuniev to win this fight. And in the next fight, look, I think this fight is going to be absolute fireworks. We've got Rei Tsuruya versus Joshua Van. Rei Tsuruya, 22 years old, Van, 23 years old. Two fighters that are going to be the future of this division, in the years to come. Both super skilled, both super talented. Man, I just think it's a really good fight. You'll hear a lot of people say that they don't want to see the UFC matching these young, hungry, up-and-coming prospects together. But man, they're in the UFC. They're in the top of the sport. Match them together. Let's see. Let's find out. Because the worst case scenario is one of these fighters is going to lose, and that fighter has got the rest of the career to rebuild and climb back up to where they are right now, and then to surpass that as well. And they'll probably rematch in like 4 or 5 years' time, or maybe even have a trilogy, talking 5 or 6 years down the line. Like, yeah, man, match them together. The two insane prospects. Let's see who's better. I want to find out. So, look, Joshua Van, I think, is going to be the better striker here. Tsuruya is going to be the better wrestler and grappler. Van does actually do a good job in regards to his wrestling and grappling, a better job than I think people give him credit for. And Tsuruya, again, look, I think from a striking perspective, Van, like I say, Van's going to have the advantage here striking, but Tsuruya doesn't allow fights to play out as a 15-minute striking fight. He'll, you look at his last fight, he comes in, bang, takedown straight away. Pretty much every round, just shoots for a takedown, doesn't even set it up with the hands. The dude's got a junior wrestling background. He's got insane jiu-jitsu as well. Tsuruya's going to be an absolute nightmare for every single fighter that he fights in regards to that wrestling and grappling. It's almost like being a super young, fresh and energetic version of Tim Elliott, for example. But I think at a much higher level. I think Tsuruya's a real problem with his wrestling and grappling, and that's absolutely a factor in this fight. The thing is with Joshua Van, like I say, Van's got such an advantage on the feet striking, but it's how many strikes does Van actually get off on Tsuruya before he's having to defend takedowns and get back up to his feet. I think it's a tough fight for Josh Van. And then the other side to Van as well is he gives away round one pretty much in every single fight. And to his credit, he makes the opponent work and he comes back really hard round 2 and 3. But I just don't think that he's doing that against fighters at the level of Tsuruya. I think if he drops a round 1 to Tsuruya, I think he's got serious problems, because I think he drops another of those last 2 rounds to Tsuruya as well, probably round 2, and then comes on round 3, but at that point he's already down. Van has got to start fast in this fight, but again, Van starting fast means coming forwards, landing combinations, landing strikes, getting into the getting into the boxing range of Tsuruya. But if you get into the boxing range of Tsuruya, he's level changing and suddenly taking that boxing element down because you're having to defend a takedown. And if you are taken down, then you're having to get back up to your feet. But then Tsuruya's grappling, I'm telling you, is like, he's so good, and his wrestling so good as well. Like, it's a really, really good fight because, again, the other side, we're seeing a lot of fights lately. Like, you look at Weili Zhang, Tatiana Suarez, then you look at last weekend Almabayev and Manel Kape. We're seeing a lot of fights at the minute, and the current trend is these guys and girls that are looking for the wrestling and grappling just aren't able to successfully get their games going against the strikers. The strikers are defending the takedowns and getting back up to the feet and then absolutely lumping on them while they're striking. Well, this is that type of fight. Like, we've got the Tsuruya side, which is your wrestling and grappling side, and then we've got Joshua Van, who can defend takedowns. Are we going to see another fight following this current trend of the striker being able to defend takedowns and then lumping on them on the feet? Well, I don't know, man. Like, I think Tsuruya's more relentless than and more able to create the scrambles and really put a high pressure and pace on his opponent than what we saw from Almabayev and what we saw from Tatiana Suarez as well. I think this is one where the wrestlers and the grapplers are going to get one back. So for those reasons, I'm picking Rei Tsuruya to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Bruno Ferreira versus Armen Petrosyan. Now, from a betting perspective, this fight was actually quite close on the betting lines when it opened. I'm sure it was like close to a picker. Maybe Armen Petrosyan was the very, very slight favourite at like -115, -120. And I'll be honest, I was interested in Petrosyan at those sort of lines because of the stylistic fight that we've got here. But the money seems to have come in on Petrosyan over the last sort of like 4 or 5 days. He's now at best -150, up at -170 in some spots. So I now think that the betting line's sitting where it should be. So I don't think there's any value in Armen Petrosyan right now. But look, if this line comes down and Petrosyan gets back down to like your -125s, your -130s, then the value will start to reappear on him. So going to be really interesting to see which way the line moves from now, because at the same time, I don't think Petrosyan can sit at -200 for very long before people, buying into Ferreira as the more solidified underdog at that point. So, yeah, look, from a stylistic perspective, it's super interesting because, look, Petrosyan's coming off that crazy knockout loss against Sharon Magomedov, which I don't think people talk about enough. Like, that was one of the best knockouts that I have ever seen. And bear in mind, I've been watching this sport along with, some boxing in K1 for like over 10 years now. That was one of the best, most creative, fun knockouts I've ever seen, with the double spin back fist from Sharon Magomedov. And it wasn't just the spin back fist that landed, rocked him, and then Sharon needed a couple more punches. Like, it sparked him. Like, it was such a good knockout. But Petrosyan, even though in my opinion was falling short in that fight, he was also fighting a really, really high level striker in Sharon Magomedov, but still doing okay. So the thing is, what I'm trying to get at here is, Bruno Ferreira is predominantly a striker as well, but in this fight he's going to be shorter with a shorter range. Petrosyan is going to be, longer and have that range advantage. So basically Petrosyan is going to be able to fire in from a little bit further out because of the length. And I think that Petrosyan is more comfortably sound in regards to his striking technique, whereas Bruno Ferreira will be more of a bull in there, potentially just throwing a jab out there to set up a big overhand right. But I just don't think that's going to be enough here to beat Petrosyan more times than he lose, if that makes sense. Like, I just think it's a low percentage outcome for Bruno Ferreira just to catch Petrosyan with a big overhand right and knock him out. Although it's possible, I just don't think it happens too often if these guys fight 10 times each. I think what's more likely going to happen in this fight is Petrosyan moves well in and out of range, manages his distance, therefore creates the management of pace, the pace of the fight and how fast it's going. Therefore, he decides when the exchanges start, and because of that, he'll end up going first. Ferreira will be second, and I think Petrosyan's just going to put, I wouldn't say like an absolute clinic on him, because I do think Bruno Ferreira is going to cause problems with the forward pressure and crash in the pocket, which Petrosyan won't like. Petrosyan will want the space and the clean striking, but I just think that because he's the better and more technically sound fighter, even though he won't feel as comfortable with Ferreira crashing that pocket, I think Petrosyan will be able to deal with it, even though he probably doesn't want to. He will. And again, I think we're going to see, a competitive striking fight, but one where we're just looking at the edges that Petrosyan's displaying. I think that's what we're going to see. Whether he gets a finish, I'm not sure. But if it does go to the scorecards, again, when you're looking at the 3 rounds, I think Petrosyan's just going to edge at least 2 out of the 3 rounds. Could see a potential 30-27. So for those reasons, I'm picking Armen Petrosyan to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Alex Morono versus Carlos Leal. Now, this is a really interesting fight. I think it's going to be a fun fight as well. Both fights are going to come to bang. I think one's going to fall, which we'll come back to in a minute. But look, with Carlos Leal, I feel so sorry for this guy. Like, he took a short notice UFC debut against a Russian in Abu Dhabi. And man, Carlos Leal got straight up robbed. It was a unanimous decision robbery as well, which you don't normally see. Normally it's the split decision robbery. But, like, you look at the media scorecard, you go into MMA decisions, and look, I know the media scorecards, I don't always reference these or reference them too often because I don't really put too much stock into it. However, when there's a unanimous decision for one fighter and then the entire media is scoring the fight to the other guy, then it kind of does speak volumes. And some people, in fact, the majority of the media actually scored it 30-27 to Carlos Leal. So I think what happened was when they read the scorecards, I think a lot of people was thinking, well, maybe in about 2 or 3 minutes, the announcement's going to come on the broadcast saying that they'd got the corners the wrong way or the fighters the wrong way, and it was actually a unanimous decision to Leal. But, that didn't happen. So, yeah, look, definitely the UFC owe Leal one for that. And I know it's not the UFC's fault. They don't choose the judges. But Dana White always does right by the fighters that get robbed. So, look, Leal's got a good opponent here in Alex Morono, where I believe he can look good, he can style, and when I said that one fighter was going to fall, I think that's going to be Morono. Look, Alex Morono's still got that dog in him. He's a veteran at this point in the UFC as well, and he'll always show up when you least expect it as well. So, like, if he's on a bit of a losing streak, which he is at the minute, 2 fights, you're going to expect him to come in here and Leal to shine and to put it on Morono to get battered. But I do think that we're going to see a better performance from Morono than what we're potentially expecting, just because we've seen this scenario happen a couple of times before. But ultimately, I think the striking super slick of Leal. I think he's got power, he's got volume, he can defend takedowns, he can get back up to his feet. And the thing is with Morono can wrestle, and he's a good BJJ black belt, a legit BJJ black belt, but he doesn't use it too often. So even if he does against Carlos Leal this time, I just think it's the wrong opponent to really lean on it, because he is good defensively. Wrestling and grappling is Carlos Leal. I think it's a fight that's going to predominantly play out on the feet, and I think Leal is going to eat some shots here and there for sure, but he's tough, he's durable, he can take those shots. But I think it's going to be Leal that's the aggressor, that's putting the combinations together, that's battering the legs, the body, the head. He targets all areas really well, and I think Leal's going to look really good in this fight. I think he's got an opponent on the other side in Alex Morono that he should be a level above in regards to his skill set, but also it's an opponent that, again, has got that dog and has got the heart in him that's going to bring the best out of Leal as well. So I think we're going to see a really solid, sharp performance from Leal, and I think he gets the job done. So for those reasons, I'm picking Carlos Leal to win this fight. And in the next fight, this is another fight between 2 young fighters. And again, like I've said in the other fight with 2 young fighters, Rei Tsuruya and Joshua Van, like, I love to see these types of fights. Like, let's find out who the better young, hungrier prospect is right now. And we've got Mairon Santos versus Francis Marshall. And like I say, from a stylistic perspective, I think it's a really good fight. But we've first got to talk about this fight from a betting perspective, because some books have got Mairon Santos at like -400 with Francis Marshall at +300. And that might be one of the most unnecessary, widest lines that we've seen this year so far. It just seems crazy to me, because I just don't see Mairon Santos covering -400 at all. Yes, he's a good fighter. Yes, he's got good qualities. But at -400, I'd be expecting, the opponent to have no path to victory or very minimal path to victory, and Santos, or the favourite, sorry, be able to cruise in whichever way he wanted to, whether that's a knockout, potentially a submission, or a 30-27 decision. I don't think any of them that are as likely as what the betting line's suggesting here. Like, Francis Marshall's a good fighter. He's a fighter that's got some good striking, trains at American Top Team, trains a lot with like Grant Dawson, for example, which I think for Francis Marshall's style as a fighter, like, that is the most perfect training partner he could possibly have. Someone that's in and around his weight, someone that, is a better version of himself. So Francis Marshall is going to be developing to, bit by bit, closely to get to the level eventually of a Grant Dawson, which is, an unbelievable fighter to be sort of matching yourself up with stylistically and improving to be as good as at some point in the future, because Francis Marshall does a good job with the wrestling and the topside grappling, and that's where Grant Dawson's predominantly best as well. So I definitely think that Santos he's got his work cut out for him enough here for this fight to not be like anywhere close to this. Like, I think the last thing that I'll mention from the betting perspective is, look, I think Mairon Santos at most should be like minus 150. To be minus 400 is ridiculous, in my opinion. Like, if he was minus 200, I'd be thinking, okay, well, he's probably being a tiny bit overvalued here, and we'll probably see some kickback on the Francis Marshall side. But, like, I actually think this line is so wide that it's going to scare people off of betting Francis Marshall here as the underdog, because they're going to be thinking, well, the bookies and the public are seeing something that I'm not. Like, what am I missing? And I'm kind of hitting that as well. I'm looking at this thinking, well, yeah, what am I missing? Like, Marshall's definitely good enough to not be a plus 300 underdog in this spot. So, look, from like how the fight plays out stylistically, Mairon Santos has got a really good Muay Thai striking style. Patient, sharp. Will chop at the low kicks at the calf. Good moving backwards as well as moving forwards, which again is a good trait to have. And he's sharp with his strikes. The Khan-Offley fight surprised me with how easy he made that fight for himself, and that's probably why there's this massive line on Mairon Santos, because, a lot of people, again, myself included, I bet Khan-Offley small, but I thought the line was too wide there. And, Mairon Santos made it look easy, but Khan-Offley, I think, has not shown has shown that he's probably not where I thought he was coming out of TUF. Might not be quite as skilled as what I thought he was. But Francis Marshall is solidified in the UFC, and the only fight that he actually got dominated in was the Isaac Dulgarian fight, which put Isaac Dulgarian against Mairon Santos, and we'll see what happens there. But, like, the other loss that Francis Marshall had was William Gomez, where a lot of people thought that Francis Marshall should have got that decision. So Marshall's been in there with, again, another good striker in William Gomez and gone very close with him. Mairon Santos does have good defensive wrestling and grappling, but that doesn't mean that he's immune to being taken down. Like, he can get caught, he can get taken down. With Marshall on top, I think he could have some top control time. Mairon Santos, he doesn't always try to get back up to his feet straight away, so there can be some top control time there from Marshall for sure. Then on the feet striking, I think Santos is the better striker, but I don't think that Marshall is going to be completely out of his depth here. I think he's at least going to be able to put his hands together and combinations together to level change and get in on takedowns. I just think it's going to be a true mixed martial arts fight. We're going to see Santos doing some good striking, moving forwards, landing some combinations, but then he's going to have to take his foot off the gas at some point and be moving backwards. Whilst he's moving backwards, he'll still do a decent job, but that's when Marshall will be able to level change, push Santos against the cage if he needs to, chain wrestle, take him down, spend some time on top. I just think we're going to see a very competitive back and forth fight between two fighters that are young, that are hungry, that are still improving, still developing, both super well trained at good gyms as well. Like Mairon Santos is at Extreme Couture, Francis Marshall's at ATT. I just think it's going to be a really, really good competitive fight. It just throws me that, like I say, we've got a minus 400 favourite and a plus 300 underdog in this fight, because it just doesn't seem right. And because of that, from a pick and prediction perspective only, I am going to take a chance on Marshall. I'm picking Francis Marshall to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Ozzy Diaz versus Djorden Santos. Now, Ozzy Diaz, I mentioned this in his UFC debut as well. I just think Ozzy Diaz is going to have a difficult time in the UFC. there's probably some fighters that he is going to be able to beat, and he might pick up 1 or 2 wins along the way, but I don't know. There's something with Ozzy Diaz. I'm just not convinced that he's going to be able to put it all together at this level in the UFC. Like, he does have some good qualities, like he can be aggressive, but it seems to be in bursts where he'll put bursts of power strikes together. And look, he has got knockouts, so you can't discredit that. Like, he's clearly doing something right, that at a high level in this sport he's getting knockouts, and again, that is because of the bursts of explosions into the power and the energy that he puts into those bursts. But it's just outside of that, he's quite low volume. It's a little bit actionless at times, where he's waiting a little bit too long. And against someone like Djorden Santos, Djorden Santos is coming off a win in the Contender Series against Will Curry. Now, Will Curry is one of the better prospects in the UK. I don't know whether Will Curry had an off night that night, or whether Djorden Santos is actually that good that he made Will Curry look out of his depth, which, if that's the case, then yeah, we've got a real fighter on our hands with Djorden Santos, because I am quite high on Will Curry. I think he's a very good fighter, and he's got a good level of fight IQ as well. So for Santos to not only beat him, but beat him comfortably, I was super impressed with that. And if that's the Santos that we're getting here against Ozzy Diaz, because look, you put Will Curry in there with Ozzy Diaz, and I think Will Curry mops the floor with him. So again, MMA math doesn't always work out, and especially when you're sort of, you're predicting fights that haven't happened. But Djorden Santos, for me, is going to be too much here for Ozzy Diaz. Ozzy Diaz will have his moments in the bursts, but the moments will come few and far between. There might be a small window of opportunity for that as well, and ultimately I just think it's low percentage that he does catch Djorden Santos with something. I think if Ozzy Diaz comes in aggressive with Santos, I don't think Santos is going to back up and go on the back foot. I think he's going to crash in the middle. And when he crashes in the middle, I just think he's going to hit clean. He's going to hit hard and straight down the middle. And it's going to be a problem for Ozzy Diaz. When it comes to the wrestling and grappling, well, we saw Will Curry try and take Santos down multiple times, and Santos, I think, did get taken down once, but got right back up to his feet. And again, I think Will Curry is a better wrestler and grappler than Diaz. So from that wrestling and grappling perspective, if Ozzy Diaz does decide to navigate away from, the striking, I just don't think that he's going to have an answer with the wrestling and grappling. I think Djorden Santos will deal well with that. And again, could be a bad decision for Diaz in regards to expending that wrestling and grappling energy, where the path to victory, if Diaz is going to win, is probably on the feet. But I just don't see him getting it done. I think Djorden Santos is the better striker, hits harder, probably a bit more durable as well, and just overall the better fighter from a skill set perspective. So for those reasons, I'm picking Djorden Santos to win this fight. And the final fight to break down, this is a fight that actually got added in the middle of the night. It was Chris Gutierrez versus John Castaneda. And this fight's actually at £145. It's a featherweight fight, whereas the reason I'm mentioning that is because both fighters normally fight at £135 at bantamweight. But John Castaneda was scheduled to fight last week against Douglas Silva de Andrade, but there was an issue, I think, with clearing de Andrade medically, so that fight got scrapped. And then Chris Gutierrez, initially on this card, was supposed to fight Gene Matsumoto, but Gene Matsumoto got moved up against Rob Font a couple of weeks ago. That actually would have been a really sick fight between Gutierrez and Matsumoto, but yeah, so Gutierrez lost his opponent and has been left without one until this point. So as soon as Castaneda lost de Andrade, the UFC have obviously acted very quickly, and to save another weight cut for Castaneda and a short notice weight cut for Chris Gutierrez, they've just made it at £145, which I completely agree with. And look, from Castaneda's perspective, I think he's gone from a fight that, in my opinion, was a really favourable fight for him, to a fight here against Chris Gutierrez, which is not favourable at all. Like, the odds haven't dropped for this fight. I'm not sure what to expect with the odds, if I'm being honest, but I don't see any way that Chris Gutierrez is not like a moderate favourite. I'd probably expect him to be maybe minus 150, minus 160, and then we'll see where the market moves the lines. But yeah, I don't expect Castaneda to be the favourite. If Chris Gutierrez is a plus money underdog, I'll be shocked, and I'll probably be on that as well. But I'm not even thinking that too much into that right now, because I just think Gutierrez is going to be around minus 150, minus 160, which again is probably where the line should be in and around. But yeah, look, in regards to how the fight plays out, Both fighters are predominantly strikers. Castaneda loves to crash forwards, throw big punches, volume, combinations, but Chris Gutierrez is a little less on the volume, but very precise with his strikes, fights really well moving backwards. So when Castaneda is coming forwards, I think he's going to get picked apart a little bit. I kind of think it's going to look a little bit like the Daniel Marcos John Castaneda fight. Like Castaneda's going to come forwards and try and put it on him, but Gutierrez is going to do a really good job at just picking his shots, landing on Castaneda. He's got hard low kicks as well. You know, he's messed up the lead leg and the calf of so many fighters that he's fought. So Castaneda's got to be mindful of that when he's coming forwards as well. And if Gutierrez does start hurting that lead leg of Castaneda, that just allows Gutierrez to really set the pace, the range, and how the fight plays out. So, look, I think if Castaneda goes to the wrestling and grappling, that might be a better option for him. But I think Chris Gutierrez can defend takedowns, or if he is taken down, he can get back up to his feet. I don't think that Castaneda is going to win a fight solely based on wrestling and grappling here. I do think the fight's going to be won and lost on the feet striking. And I just think Chris Gutierrez is a level above where Castaneda's at striking, both from a skill set perspective, but moving forwards and backwards as well. He's very good. So for those reasons, I'm picking Chris Gutierrez to win this fight. And that's all for this episode of the podcast. So once again, for everybody listening and tuning in, thank you very much. We always appreciate it. Remember, if you're on one of the podcast platforms like Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, please come over to our YouTube channel as well, where you'll also find the podcast. And whilst you're on our YouTube channel, we'd really appreciate you hitting that subscribe button, as it does help the channel. And of course, it is me that replies to comments as well. So if you want a conversation, if you want a chat, tell me who you're betting on, tell me where we disagree or who we agree on, tell me where you see the value, whatever you want to chat about. Again, that also helps all the YouTube algorithms as well. So always happy to have a conversation, just in general and for the benefit of the channel as well. And for one last time, if you're wanting to jump into the action this weekend, then make sure you do so at MMAplay365.com. You can get one event for like $5, monthly is $10, the year annually is $99, so it's nothing too expensive. Our ethos is that we want you to make the money back that you're spending with us on the subscription packages as quick as you possibly can, so you can start profiting on top of your bets. And that's all at MMAplay365.com. I'm Newsome. Thanks for listening. I'll see you again next week.